Hello, welcome to Shrewsbury Film Society's online film club. Our next film is called The Green Ray, and it was made in 1986 by the French director Eric Rohmer, who is really one of the big names in world cinema. As usual, we've got several reasons why we've picked this one. First of all, as you will see, it really makes perfect late summer viewing. It's just ideal for this time of year. Secondly, we did actually show it as our final film in the summer of 2013 at the Hive, and it was very well received then. We also thought, therefore, that it was worth reviving, and we've actually shown a couple of other films by Rohmer that have been equally well received by our audiences. We showed A Tale of Autumn in 2013, at the beginning of that year, and in 2015 we showed Pauline at the Beach. Both of those proved really popular. Thirdly, this is a film that's very highly regarded by film critics. When it was released in 1986, it won the Best Film Prize called the Golden Lion at the Venice Film Festival, which is one of the big three alongside Cannes and Berlin in the world cinema circuit. And because it's so good, it is often revived. It was the centrepiece at BFI South Bank a few years ago, when they did an Eric Rohmer season. Finally, just in terms of programming, we thought this would be a nice contrast to our last film, in which very little was said, because in this one, by complete contrast, the characters more or less talk non-stop. Eric Rohmer lived from 1920 until 2010, and he started making films in the late 1950s, as he moved from being a film critic to being a film director. And he carried on making films until 2007, so when he was 87 years old, he made his last film. In the late 50s and then into the early 60s, he was very closely associated with what's often called the French New Wave cinema, so people like Francois Truffaut, Jean-Luc Godard, Claude Chabrol, Jacques Rivette. They all worked together at a magazine called Cahiers du Cinéma, which was very influential, and then they all moved into film directing in their own right. Rohmer's name was actually Maurice Henri Joseph Schrerer, but he adopted the name Eric Rohmer for professional purposes. The Eric comes from the German and then Hollywood director Erich von Stroheim, and the Rohmer comes from an author called Sax Rohmer, who wrote the Fu Manchu novels. Rohmer first came to international fame in the late 60s with My Night at Maud. I think that came out in 1969, and then Claire's Knee in 1970, and both of those still crop up regularly at repertory cinemas and so on. He made 25 films altogether, but the majority of them are grouped into three series for which he's best known. There is this one called The Six Moral Tales, which was his first group. Then came a series called Comedies and Proverbs, which you can actually get all in this set, which has a couple of other films as well. And then there was a third set of films called Tales of the Four Seasons, and this one happens to be The Tale of Autumn. Nearly all his films were contemporary dramas, although he did make a few historical dramas as well. And as I mentioned earlier, he did remarkably keep going until he was 87, and then he stopped making his films. Rohmer was a very private man, and he kept his family and work life completely separate, to the extent that apparently he never told his mother that he had given up the reliable and high-status job of being a school teacher for the more disreputable world of film directing. It seems that in the days before the internet, a change of name was sufficient to keep his professional filmmaking career a complete secret from his mother for his entire life. If you're interested in learning more about him, there is an absolute blockbuster of a biography that came out, or at least was translated into English 3 or 4 years ago, which gives plenty of information about Rohmer the man, and also lots of interesting background information about the individual films. This film, The Green Ray, is very loosely based on a short story of the same name by Jules Verne, as in fact you'll discover from the story in the film. And Jules Verne's short story was in turn inspired by a real optical phenomenon called the green ray, which is what sometimes very occasionally happens at sunset. There's just a momentary glow of green as the sun dips below the horizon. Not often visible, but it really does happen. It's a genuine phenomenon. You can actually read up on the details of it in Wikipedia. And in the film itself, actually, the physics of this situation are explained by an elderly white-bearded man. Believe it or not, he is not an actor, but he's actually a physicist who happened to be on holiday in Biarritz just when Roma's crew were shooting the film and was available to give an explanation of exactly how the green ray works. You will see one in the film itself. I don't think this is giving away too much, but they did have to send a camera crew out to the Canary Islands to record it for real, contrary to what's reported on various websites. This reality is actually why there's a very unusual credit at the film's end. The credit reads Coucher du Soleil, or Sunset, and names the man who managed to capture it. It cost quite a lot of money, apparently, to send the crew out to the Canary Islands, and then they had to hang around to capture this momentary gleam. And according to Roma's biographers, that actually added quite a lot to the cost of the film and pushed the total cost up to £600,000, which is, of course, still incredibly cheap for a film. Partly they kept the costs down by shooting on 16mm, which is why you'll see the images do look a bit grainy at times. But it's also one of the reasons why Roma, quite remarkably, is one of the very few cinema directors who actually managed to make a profit from most of his films. For this one, in fact, he sold the TV rights to Canal Plus in the early days of cable television, and then worked out he only needed 60,000 people in the cinema to see it. In fact, the Venice Film Festival prize boosted his audience in France alone to over 400,000 cinema tickets sold, so he made quite a tidy profit for his company on this one. The Green Ray is quite different to many of Roma's films in some ways, and similar in other ways. So one of the main differences is that a lot of it is improvised, and it uses quite a lot of non-professional actors, including, in fact, 4 members of the family of the woman who plays the protagonist, Delphine. And furthermore, in one of the outdoor sequences towards the second half of the film, that's set at the home of one of her friends, the people playing her parents really are her parents. Similarly, there is an extended discussion about vegetarianism in the film, which was entirely improvised on the hoof. And the taxi driver who talks about never having left Paris is a real taxi driver, although rather artfully what appears to be a brief conversation with him is actually edited down from several hours of footage. Although the film also lacks the references to philosophy that are characteristic of many of his other films, for example, the discussion of Pascal's work in My Night with Maud, and it also lacks some of the symmetry of their storylines, what it very much does do is showcase his extraordinary talent, which he showed over very many films, for getting tremendous performances out of young women actors. In this film, not only are nearly all the people on screen young women, but so were the director of photography. I think she was 23 years old when this film was made, and his lead sound recordist was a woman of 26. He also worked with a female producer, Margaret Menegoth, on almost all of his films, and it may be that this is why he was able to generate such apparently intimate discussions on screen for us. Why is The Green Ray so highly regarded, you might wonder? I think most critics agree that it's remarkable for the way in which it sustains what seems like a vanishingly thin plot, namely, who should Delphine go on holiday with in the summer, over the full length of a feature film. And it turns this question into a poignant and quite profound study of friendships, of the role of luck in life, of the duties we have to each other, especially to our friends, and about the fear of loneliness. Many film directors can include these themes as subplots in their films, but I think only someone really as great as Roma could make a whole film out of them. And I hope you'll agree it really is a little piece of summer magic.